Hello, I'm Doug.
Yes, and I'm Ian.
Pleased to meet you, Ian.
Pleased to meet you too, Doug.
Ian, when and where were you born?
I was born in Hall Green. I was baptised in the little church on School Road in Yardley Wood. In fact, I started life in Webb Lane, number 36 in Webb Lane, Hall Green, and that was where I first started life.
What year was it?
That would be in 1923.
Ian, what were you doing when the Second World War started in 1939?
Well, I was still at school, but it was only a very short spell, and I started work a few months after the war started, and I used to my first branch that I had to go to was at 6 Ways Lascelles, Aston, which meant that I had to go through the whole length of the city from Hall Green, and I used to bus, and I used to go through to 6 Ways Lascelles, usually by taking a bus into town and then taking number 6 tram down through New Town Road down to 6 Ways Lascelles. And it was my first day there was quite frightening, because I knocked on the front door, and this great gentleman with a wing collar and a stiff, and his name was Dacre Lee, and he was one of the old school, and he should have been retired, but because the war started they wouldn't let him retire, and he wasn't a well-humoured person at all.
Who was your first employer, and were you involved with war work as well as working?
My first work was with the Midland Bank, 6 Ways Lascelles, Aston. I was a junior clerk, and very, very green, and no, that's more I could say, really. As far as war work was concerned, there wasn't very much. Oh, the only thing I had to do, in actual fact, was fire watching in the bank. And I used to have to stop at night time in the bank usually with a messenger or a paid watcher, and we had to work on a rota on that basis. But apart from that, no, I wasn't involved in anything. In fact, during the war, actually, I would stand in the porch sometimes and listen to the shrapnel rattling down the roofs of the houses. And it was one of the great things was that afterward to go along the streets and pick up bits of shrapnel that were lying on the pavements and so forth. We obviously had a shelter, and on occasions we had to use it when there was a raid, we lost our water supply on several occasions, through mains being damaged and so forth. My father was one of the wardens for the road and so forth, and that was it. I mean, it was. On one occasion we lost all the water supply, and the only water we could get was from a little well from a cottage which was up by the road, and we had to boil all the water, because obviously, although the occupants of the village and the little cottage would drink the water quite satisfactorily, as far as we were concerned, because we had mains water, we couldn't drink that sort of. We had to boil it. That's about all I can say about the war, apart from the fact that, of course, when we had raids, one had to travel by bus, and you would go into town. You never knew which particular route you would take after a raid. You used to go all around I used to go around parts of Birmingham I'd never seen before, and so forth. And then when you got into town, if you were lucky, you would get on the number 11 tram. And that would take you down through New Town Row. One occasion I can remember going down through New Town Row, and a bomb had dropped in the middle of the railway, the middle of the tram line, and the ends of the tram line had sort of were up in the air, as it were, and there was a car perched on the end of one of these railway lines, because in the dark he'd been travelling along without any lights. He'd been following the tram lines, and he finished up on top of one of the. It must have been a dreadful shock for him after. But and it was. But you just accepted these raids, and at a certain time, it was such a performance getting round the city and so forth that I borrowed £20 off my father and bought a bicycle, an Imperial petrol, and it was pride of my joy. And I used to cycle to work down through Watery Lane and down through the back streets there, and that was a much better way of getting back to and from work and so forth.
Yes. Ian, can you remember any particular raids on Birmingham?
There was a particular raid. It lasted 4 nights, in actual fact. It's always been overshadowed by Coventry because, of course, Birmingham was never mentioned. West Midlands was mentioned, towns in West Midlands, but Birmingham, because of the moral effect it might have on the country, Birmingham was never mentioned because it was the centre of the car and heavy industry and car industry. And on this particular raid, there were 4 consecutive nights we were raided, and a large section of the city was on fire. And if the Germans had come on the 5th night, they could have razed the city to the ground, because by then all the water mains had been burst. There was no water supply. The only water they could get was out of the canal. And but fortunately, the 5th raid never came, and the city had a chance to recover itself again. But of course there was no mention of that at all, and it really was. But it was very serious as far as Birmingham was concerned. It could have caused an awful lot of damage. They continued, but like everything else, they just stopped. They stopped before they should have stopped, and that was it. Yes. Yes, I remember the occasion after one of these big raids. I was standing at the junction of New Street, Corporation Street, and looking down New Street towards the Times building. All on the left-hand side, the buildings were all on fire, terrific fires. The heat from the fires had melted. The road, in actual fact, were wood blocks with tar in between. And with the heat from the buildings, flames were licking across the road. Or, and so the road was actually on fire as well. It was the most amazing sight.
When did you join up, Ian, and why did you choose the Navy?
I joined up on the 2nd of February 1942. I was a volunteer. Now, the reason that I joined, first of all, I'd always been fascinated by ships. As a small boy, I remember on holiday in Bournemouth, the HMS Hood paying a courtesy visit to the resort and being taken out by my father to climb over the hood. And it was, I was very small, and it impressed me very much. I'd always been fascinated by the sea anyway. I got an old aunt who used to, every Christmas used to send me a wonder book. And these wonder books were marvellous. The first one was Wonder Book of Aircraft, which I wasn't interested in, but it was okay, a very nice book. But then I said, could I have a Wonder Book of Ships? And I had this wonder book of, I've still got it. I've got all the wonder books there, a whole pile of them. They were wonderful from an educational point of view, and I was always fascinated by the sea. And of course, when the war came, I realised that when my call-up date came, they could put me anywhere. I could become a Bevan boy. I could go on to the army. I could go into the Air Force. I could go into the Navy. Now I wanted the Navy, and to make sure that I could, I approached my employers and said, "Now look, will you release me so I can volunteer?" And they said, "No, we're very sorry, but we've lost a lot of men and we can't afford to let you go. But when's your call-up date?" I told them what the call-up date was. "Right, we'll let you volunteer, we'll let you go 3 months before your call-up date," which meant that I could volunteer. So I went along to Derrit End Recruiting Centre for the Navy, and that started things as far as I was concerned. I got into the Navy. They wanted me to go into the Marines, but I said I wanted to go into the seaman side. I really fancied. I wanted to see some of the world as well, and I thought, Marines, you might not be spending time on ships, but seamen you probably will, and I did.
What happened to you, Ian, after you joined up?
I was told to report to Portsmouth, and in actual fact, I had to join HMS Collingwood. Now, HMS Collingwood was a training establishment. The Germans had claimed that they sunk the Collingwood, which was ridiculous because it was a shore establishment anyway, which caused great amusement amongst the local naval personnel. We all went down there. We were little raw recruits, and we finished up in a Nissen hut. I mean, most of us were Brummies and so forth, because that's part of where it came from. I was very embarrassed because I was sort of very, very green, and when we were on this coach with some civilians going on this bus down to Collingwood, some rather bawdy songs were sung, and it was rather embarrassing. But I soon got over that problem, and admittedly, it was very hard going. It was pretty stark. Before you got a uniform, you were up and down on the parade ground. Icy conditions. It was very cold in winter time, but until you got your uniform, you had to, and basically it was like almost like army training. The whole thing, I was supposed to get you to the idea of discipline, really, and blade bashing was all the rest. A certain amount of basic seamanship was concerned. Our instructor in our particular hut was an old ex-army chief petty officer who'd come in from retirement, of course. Really old sea dogs. They used to tube plug and all the rest of it, but they were really old sea dogs. But they were wonderful old instructors. And when we finished the seamanship course, they said, well, now it's a case of specialisation. And the old PO looked at me. He said, you wouldn't make a good torpedo man. He said, well, I'm not so good at gunnery. And he said, certainly you're not going to be a stoker. He said, there's two options as far as you're concerned. He said, it's either radar or ASDICs. And I said, what are ASDICs? Oh, he said, it's a bit hush-hush, he said, but it's a new system hunting submarines. And it means that you've got to go up to Scotland, where the ASDIC base is, you see. So anyway, with that, I had my leave, and then I went up to Scotland. Now, there were two bases. In Dunoon was the theory, because there's a lot of theory attached to this and a lot of electronic equipment and so forth. And the second was HMS Nemesis down in Campbelltown. Now, Campbelltown, that was where the practice took place as opposed to the theory. So first of all, you did your theory up in Campbelltown, in Dunoon. When you've done that, you then went down to Campbelltown, and in Campbelltown, HMS Nemesis was an old. I think she was the royal yacht of the King of the Belgians.
Right.
And she was anchored in the harbour there. They claimed she couldn't move because so many tin cans had been thrown over the side. She was probably anchored on those. But anyway, the thing was this: that while we were on this ship, we did training on board with instruments and so forth. and then the practical side was there were small trawlers and all sorts that with ASDIC equipment on them. And we used to have to go out into the Firth of Clyde at the entrance there, and we had to hunt submarines. Now, obviously, the submarine we were hunting, it had to be a real submarine, but it also had to have a buoy on top, so that the people looking after knew where the submarine was, and we could lose it, of course. And that we had to do our training on how to discover the submarines. It was an interesting thing because it worked on this principle that you had a dome underneath and you had an oscillator inside, and impulses went through this oscillator which sent out waves under the water. And now that, like anything else, if it hits anything, you get an echo back from it. And as far as we were concerned, you could pick up all sorts of things when the thing was switched on. You could pick up rocks, you could pick up bricks, you could pick shoals of fish, all sorts of things. And it was purely by sort of trial and error and experience that you got to know. Now, if you hit a submarine, that's what you were after. You would get a metallic reply, and it would come out on the screen, and you hear it through your headphones. And when you would ping, you're sending out the transmissions. Now, the thing was this, that you could tell quite a lot. You probably wouldn't go more than 700 or 800 yards. That was about the range. But you could tell things. Now, if the submarine was coming to hide you, the pitch would be high. If it was retreating, it would be low. or it was moving left to the right. You could tell the skipper, in actual fact, what you thought it was doing.
Mm.
Now, when you carried out the attack, obviously they would attack on the bearing that you got for your submarine. Now, when it got to a certain stage, of course, you lost contact because the beam wouldn't go. The submarine would you couldn't miss the beam. I forget how many yards it was now, but anyway, there was a blank period when you lost contact, and that is the part when the submarine had a chance of getting out of the way, because if it could alter his course quickly, because you had that blank period before the ship passed over, and then you dropped your depth charges, and there was a bit of a gap. And and of course, not only that, but particularly with the small ships, you had to go pretty fast. Otherwise, you'd blow your stern off, because with the depth charges going off at the back.
Right.
But the thing was this: and as far as I was concerned, all the ships I worked on, this was the basis. But later on some of the more modern ships, there's a thing called a hedgehog. Now, the hedgehog meant that you never lost contact with your submarine. You shot a whole series of little bombs out in front of you,
Right.
and you could on the bearing that you'd got. In other words, you could hit the submarine before it had a chance of disappearing underneath.
Right. It had to be very quick.
Yes, we had a very. But the thing was this: that it was very crude. It was very hit and miss, but it was the best we got in those particular times. Of course, I mean, sometimes we were lucky, sometimes we weren't. And I'm sure nowadays they've got a much more efficient way of catching subs. But that was the way we did it. And as I say, you just hope for the best. I've carried out attacks on submarines. I've never seen one come to the surface, unfortunately, but you never know, because sometimes a submarine, if it's damaged, it stops down below and you don't know where it's gone to anyway, particularly if it's gone down. Sometimes they were very cunning, and they used to release rubbish, bits of oil, anything, and to give the impression that, you've sunk it, and then they'd slink off and so forth. But it was a boring sort of existence, really, when just sitting down there hour after hour after hour. But then again, a lot of military and naval service was boring. I mean, there times when things were active and so forth, but there were long periods when you just had to survive, and as I say, boredom was one of the things that could catch you particularly. And as far as the Navy was concerned, of course, I suppose you had to be all in the alert, because with the Army, if you're behind the lines and you're okay, or if the Air Force, if you're back at the base, you're okay. But with the Navy, you never were, because when you were at sea, you were vulnerable anyway. You could get torpedoed any time, and therefore you had to be prepared. And another thing too, as far as active service was concerned, when we went up into the Mediterranean, as I started life in the Eastern Fleet, but we moved. We had a refit in. This was the Catholic. We had a refit in Simonstown in South Africa. We didn't know that because we were having a refit, they were going to send us up in the Mediterranean, which they did. And from then onwards, we spent our time between Gibraltar and Portside, ferrying and convoys through, and that was a busy time, because sometimes you got through without being attacked, but very often you were attacked. And the thing was that, I suppose, as far as the Mediterranean was concerned, it's a small sea, and therefore you were very vulnerable. I mean, from an aircraft point of view, it wasn't like the Atlantic. You were vulnerable all the time. And the thing was this, and I suppose as far as the Germans were concerned, it's a German trend that they're very what's the word I want now? They're very meticulous. And we knew exactly when they would come, because they never altered their pattern. We always did close up at action stations half an hour before they were due, because we knew what time they were due. There was no element of surprise as far as that was concerned. Yes. And that's the way it was. And sometimes we got through without interference, and sometimes we didn't. And that was it. And that was how we spent most of our time.
Ian, what ships were you on in the Second World War?
The first ship I served on was HMS Hotspur. I picked her up in Durban. When I'd gone, I went out abroad on a convoy. Actually, it was a military convoy, but there were a small group of specialists, naval personnel, ASDIC operators, which they wanted out there, and we should have been going out to Colombo. HMS Lanka at Colombo. But in actual fact, because the Japs were advancing through that particular part of the world, it was decided that the Eastern Fleet should move to Mombasa. Now they put me ashore in Durban, and we went up to a transit camp in Pietermaritzburg, a clearance camp, all under canvas. It was very, very crude, and from there I was allocated my first ship Durban, my first ship in Durban, and that was the Hotspur. And from then onwards, we used to travel up through the Mozambique Channel to Mombasa and back again, usually with supplies or for the Eastern Fleet and so forth, and taking the odd merchant ship up. There was quite a lot of submarine activity there, because the submarines used to come into Lourenco marks in Mozambique, and obviously agents would tell us they were doing it. We used to dash at them, but we could never catch them, because of course they were out before we ever had a chance of catching them. Although we did, I mean, I remember one occasion, it was quite impressive. We were escorting the Warspite up from Durban back to Mombasa, and it was rather a heavy sea, and there was a submarine warning, and there were two destroyers. There was the Hotspur and the Foxhound as protection for the Warspite, and as soon as they got this warning, the Warspite put on steam, and the poor little destroyers couldn't catch up at all. They were left behind because, but that, as I say, there was the odd ship being torpedoed and so forth, but it was relatively quiet. It wasn't until I was transferred onto the Catterick and eventually finished up in the Mediterranean that things really hotted up as far as we were concerned, because not only did we have submarines, we had aircraft, and of course in the Med, I think it's true to say that we lost more naval ships in the Mediterranean than we did anywhere else, because of course we were in a confined sea, we were vulnerable to air attack, and also there were a considerable number of U-boats there, and also the Italians had quite a substantial submarine fleet which were used. So really we had quite a busy time there. And that is why, of course, Malta became isolated, because because we couldn't get the ships through to her because of the danger of aircraft cover and also with the submarine cover as well.
Who was your favourite captain?
My favourite captain was Captain Tyson. Now Tyson had a bit of a history. He started off as a cadet at Dartmouth. But he was a bit of a wild lad. This was the story I heard. He was a bit of a wild lad, and they threw him out of the Navy. So he was a seaman. He went into the Merchant Navy, and he got his master's certificate and so forth. And when the war started, they were desperately short of men to man ships. And they obviously they took Tyson on, and as an RN officer, and there was no RNVR, certainly as an RN officer, just 2 rings. And that was and Catterick, I think, was his first ship. Now he was many of the captains were very secret about what their activities of their ships were. But now Tyson, he was very fair. Once you got out to sea, he would tell you where you were going and what you were going to do, which is more than many of the men did. He was a disciplinarian. He demanded the best out of his crew, but the thing is that the men thought the world of him. He was a do and daring sort of chap. He as I say, I think if we'd seen the Shah North, he would have gone for it, and we would have got blown out of the water. But I mean that's neither here nor there. But that's the sort of chap he was. Factually, we never did make the Shah North, and that never happened. But he was the lads thought the world of him. And if you went ashore to sort of play a game of football with another member of the flotilla and so forth, he would be there on the touchline, egging on his boys. And the breadth of his rank meant nothing at all. Now, in the course of time, particularly when we got up to the Mediterranean, he earned his 2nd ring, so he became a lieutenant commander, and that was quite something as far as he was concerned. And right at the very end, when he left the ship, they'd given him his third ring. In other words, he really was. They recognised him as a first-class man. In fact, a lovely story this is, that we were in Syracuse at the time, and it was on Christmas Eve, and we knew that we were going to arrive in Malta in the early hours of the following morning. Now, on these small ships, you have to do the best you can with what you've got in the way of decorations and celebrating Christmas. Well, and of course, and it was also self-catering too. You had to get to your own food supplies and so forth. And our particular mess caterer, in a small mess, he got some birds for Christmas. When I say birds, they had clawed like pterodactyls. They were dreadful looking things, but at least they looked like birds. And we got a couple of these for cooking for our mess and so forth. Now, when we arrived in Durban, we arrived in Malta in the early hours of the morning. Everybody was prepared to sort of celebrate Christmas as well as they could. A whole pile of foliage had been stuck on top of the radar mast, and it made the tree look like a palm tree. Yeah. When we got into harbour, we did the usual decorations inside and so forth. But the thing was, we knew we were going out to sea at 5 o'clock in the evening, and in that part of the world, it was our watch on, watch off because of the near vicinity of the Germans, who were still in Italy, of course, and all Cyprus and so forth. And when the time came, and we were with another ship called the Slazak. Now the Slazak, she was an English destroyer, but she's got a Polish crew, and we both tied up against a French oil tanker in the main harbour. Now, as far as the Frenchmen were concerned, they also wanted to celebrate Christmas, but of course they weren't going out to sea, and everybody wanted to get their heads down in the afternoon because they knew they were going out on watch. And after they had a very, very full meal and plenty to drink, the Frenchmen were making an awful noise, and the quartermaster came round, and the crew grumbled about this, and he phoned the captain. He said, "Well, the captain said, we'll turn the hose on them," and which was rather cruel. And when it came to leaving harbour, the thing was this: it's a case. Crew get into the rig of the day in preparation for leaving harbour, and you got into your full rig. You'd have a forecastle party with an officer in charge. You have a quarterdeck party with another officer in charge, and the pipe came through. Crew will not be in the rig of the day. Crew will be in funny rig. Somebody said funny rig. Yes. Well, what's funny? Oh, well, I've seen Jimmy, the one that's first lieutenant, and he dressed up, he looked like Robin Hood. Right. So, of course, the lads got the end of straight away. They raided all the bunting lockers. Right. They draped up in anything they wear, bar a naval uniform, and that is the way that we started onto our stations for leaving harbour. My particular place for leaving harbour was up on the bridge. And when I got up there, I found Tyson. He was wearing a red fez. He got a floral dressing gown. He got the Union Jack draped round his waist. He was standing up in front with his ceremonial sword, and he was singing "Roll Out the Barrel." Right up, well, how many? Must have had a hell of a lot to drink. Now that we were a dreadful sight, actually. There were two ratings sitting on the end of the gun barrels with a twin 4-inch forward. I don't know what happened on the quarterdeck, but very, very, very similar, I should think. We come off the South African station. There was one of our South Africans. He was a magnificent figure of a man, and he was stark naked, and he was dancing up and down on the forecastle, you see. And we must have been a horrible sight. And what we didn't know was that the Commander-in-Chief Malta, with a lot of VAPs and their ladies, were all up at the Fecal station to watch a Royal Naval vessel going out on duty, you see. Yeah. And of course, we went out first because the Slazak, being the junior ship, who was all proper as it should be, of course, had followed us out. Well, we must have been a dreadful sight. And of course, to make matters worse, when we got outside the harbour, Tyson challenged the Slazak to a star shell duel. He lit up Malta, and I mean, he must have got a hell of a blast.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, we never knew exactly, and it was only 3 months after that he left the Catterick, but he got his 3rd ring.
Wonderful.
In other words, he was the sort of man that peacetime Navy could never have tolerated because he was a wild card.
Yes.
But in wartime, he was the sort of man that you had to have.
Yes.
And I don't know what happened. We think he joined a large destroyer and went out to the Pacific Fleet. Well, I never heard anything more about him, but he was the finest captain I've ever served under.
Wonderful. Did you ever have to abandon ship?
Never in the case of war service. There was an occasion in the early days, but it was merely practice. And we were up at our action stations, which was a routine thing that you had to do occasionally. And on this particular occasion, the order came through to abandon ship. Now, there was a silence for a moment, and nobody could. And then somebody shouted out, "The ruddy ship is sinking! Get over the side quick!" And with that, one rating jumped over the side, and then they all started to jump over the side. In fact, the ship's crew jumped over the side. I think the only man who'd actually survived was the chief engineer, who'd hidden down the engine room. But apart from everybody else was in the water. I mean, it was madness actually, because I mean, to have a ship. This was it was in the Tava River in Mombasa, and to have a ship completely stripped of its crew with just a captain on board. I mean, that should not be, of course, but it was. But the whole thing was that with this, as I say, we had a small a whaler which was manned by six oarsmen, and the rest were little we call Carley floats. And these little Carley floats were the little square floats with rope holding little hands on the sides, and the entire crew went into the sea like this. And the only way we could keep control was to hang onto the whaler, and they were strung out like a row of sausages. But the great thing was that what the captain had done, in actual fact, was to prove that there were sufficient lifeboats on that and life rafts on that ship, that should she go down, there was room for everybody, and it was a great moral lifter. But that's the only time that we actually did any abandoning ship. We were lucky.
What was it like in the Mediterranean?
There was no part of it where there was what you might call a quiet period and a safe area. The Mediterranean was a relatively small sea in comparison with oceans. We were very vulnerable because the Germans had aircraft bases all in Italy, in Crete, all along the coast there, even in the south of France and so forth. And of course, the thing was this, that they kept an eye on us all the time. They knew exactly, we were taking troop convoys through, a lot of them going down through to the Far East. We were also taking supplies and stuff down through to Egypt to supply, ammunition and stuff for supplying the 8th Army down in North Africa, and I say we normally we had about 6 destroyers, and a light cruiser was our main force. And we used to sometimes we used to get attacked very regularly, but it was always at the same time every day on the occasions that the attack took place. And the Germans were so methodical that we knew exactly when they were coming. We closed up at action stations half an hour before they would arrive. So we had an advantage over there, but of course they used to come in from the sunset to us, and we lost 1 or 2 ships like this, of course, and but mainly we got most of our stuff through, of course. In the Mediterranean, of course, we lost a great proportion of naval ships, particularly because of the vulnerability from aircraft. But you know, in other words, it was a hot area to have to serve in. But at least it wasn't like the Arctic convoys. At least if you landed in the sea, at least you had a chance of keeping alive and so forth. And that's about it as far as that's concerned. We were attacked also we were attacked by submarines as well, of course. And as I say, I've seen one or two ships. Going along the North African coast, I remember a big Dutch liner coming along, and she was in our stern, and she got hit by a torpedo. She tried to get into shallow waters, but she failed and so forth. But you know, you just took things like that in your stride, as it were. It was just part of wartime. We would carry out attacks. On our ship, we'd never actually, whether we'd ever sunk a submarine, I don't know. We carried out attacks on them. We'd seen debris coming up to the surface, which would have been false or not, as may be. But the great thing about ASDICs was that it was the deterrent as well, because, you know, a submarine hearing these ping sounds, it was a warning. And I don't think actually that a submarine would really attack a thing like a destroyer unless they could avoid it. Merchant ships, different matter altogether. But as I say, in those days, ASDICs was a relatively, well, I will say crude. It's the best we had on offer.
Best, yes.
You know, and as I say, it no longer exists now. They've got some other form now. I really wouldn't know what it is, but they obviously have a much better method now of catching submarines. But that's the way we had to do it in those days.
Were you involved in the invasion of Italy?
Now, as far as we were concerned, we took part in the landings at Salerno. Our job at the time was to stand by the battleship Resolution. I'm sorry, son. No, I'm sorry, wrong. It wasn't the Resolution. It was the Valiant. The battleship Valiant. Now, she was bombarding the beaches and so forth, and we didn't do any bombarding. We had to stand by her as anti-aircraft cover. I mean, she got her own anti-aircraft guns, but we had to supply the extra firepower in case the battleship got damaged. Because as far as we were concerned, it didn't matter if we got hit, but it was far more important that the battleship was preserved. Because I mean, it's a much more valuable ship. In actual fact, after the bombardment, the Valiant went down to Palermo. In Sicily, and we had the job of escorting her down there, and it was a nighttime trip, and I remember that we were attacked, and I've never seen such a magnificent firework display in my life, because the Valiant was throwing up all her anti-aircraft stuff with tracer bullets, of course, and it was really like a firework display. But nevertheless, she got down there without damage, and we got her down to Palermo. We didn't take part in Anzio, but we did take part in the landings in Sicily. You know, before the Italians capitulated or gave up the game. In fact, and we also went through the Straits of Messina, and we could see the cheering Italians in the distance as we came through. And that was the way it went. Oh, and another thing too, as far as landing in Italy was concerned, a force was going to take troops up to Naples, which was still in the hands of the Germans. Now, it was an American force, but they lost one particular ship, and we were seconded with this American unit. So we had to work with the Americans on this unit going through, and we landed approached the Bay of Naples. Now, the Bay of Naples, in actual fact, they claimed had been swept of mines, because of course the bay was full of mines. But the Americans weren't fools. Who did they send through first? They sent the little the little Brit through first.
Right, yeah.
But anyway, but we got through all right. There was no trouble. But Naples was an appalling sight. There were sunken ships all over the place. There were still burning buildings. The Germans were still in the outskirts. And the thing that I shall always remember was this, that as we tied up, we anchored there, little boats came out with civilians inside. Now we have a thing called a gas chute. And when you finish with all your meals, you put it on the gas chute and over the side it goes. They were out there on these little boats with their little buckets and things to catch all the rubbish coming down. They were starving, and it was pathetic. And or anything that came in the way of food, whatever it was, they were down there. And another thing too, they were giving priority to their children. And a lot of the lads, they would go along to the canteen and get little bars of chocolate and hand it across, and for the children. And you know, all these people were starving, but they always gave the children the first choice. They didn't eat any. The chocolate was given for the children anyway. But I always remember, when I see people now wasting food and people grumbling about food, and then I look at those poor Italians who'd been starving and were eating any rubbish that was edible at all, you know, it brings you down to earth very much indeed. But that was all, and of course we as I say, we took part in the landings. Well, on the D-Day landings, of course, we were in the Med, but at that particular time we did the landings in the south of France and Sicily and so forth. And that was, and then after that I was, that's another story too. I got an attack of gastroenteritis. Something I'd eaten in Portside, I think probably melon, and I became ill. Now then, I couldn't eat. I couldn't do anything at all. But they wouldn't put me ashore anywhere because they'd only got 4 ASDIC operators anyway, and they couldn't afford to lose one anyway. And they hoped I would get better, and I didn't get better. I was there for a week. I don't think I ate any food at all. I was kept alive on pounded lime juice. Wow. And I got to the stage where we got to Mers el Kebir in Algeria. Now Mers el Kebir is where the French fleet was sunk by the British in the early stages. And there were still wrecks. You could still see the funnels and masts sticking up of the French ships that had gone down. And they put me ashore there with my kit bag and my hammock, and they put me in a jeep and they sent me off to an American field hospital out in the desert, more dead than alive. And of course, when I got there, with the Americans, they hadn't, none of them had seen any war service at all that stage. They'd all just come in from Casablanca, and there was this field hospital there, and the food was magnificent. I'd never had anything like it in my life before. You know, it really was marvelous. And I was put in this isolation tent with the gastroenteritis, and the commander of the camp came around and sat at the end of the bed because I was a limey and I was the only limey they'd ever seen and so forth, and they chatted away, and I was so amazed because we chatted away, and I said, well, how did you come across? Oh, we came across on the Queen Mary, the finest ship the Americans ever built. And, oh, I got so wild with them, because they honestly thought it was true, Anyway, and the commander sat on the end of the bed and said, well, where did I come from? Oh, I come from the Midlands. Now, isn't it strange how men come from the Midlands and want to go out to sea and so forth? Yeah. Anyway, the time came when I got better, and they got to go back to a British unit again. So they put me on a train in Oran. The French trains, of course, they're not platform level. You had to climb up steps to get into them, of course. And it was a steam locomotive. And I got on this train, and we travelled along the North African coastline, but at the foot of the Atlas Mountains. And it was I've never had such a journey in my life before. You looked down the carriage, and there were goats, there were chickens, there were Arabs, there was everything there under the sun there, and I'm in tropical whites. Now the coal that was being used was very, very, very poor quality, and I'm sure more coal out of the funnel than smoke came out. Yeah. And by the time I got down to Algiers, where they took me there, I was what called battleship grey rather than in wiggle-wise. And another fascinating thing was, but this train went down some of the big steep bends. As they slowed down, little figures came out of the bush and jumped onto the buffers and jumped through them to get a free ride into the next town.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it was a most amazing sight, but it was, you know, and I always forget that. And of course, when I got down to Algiers, which was HMS Hannibal, I think, it was then that I put on a ship that took me back to my original ship, the Catterick. And from the Catterick, I was then put ashore in Taranto, the old Italian base, and from there I took my ship home. I came home on the Cape Town Castle, I think.
And what date was that?
Well, I don't know, but I'd done 2.5 years in the Med at the time. I can't be persuasive. It's probably the book.
Probably 45.
So, yeah, somewhere like that, I think.
Okay.
Well, yeah, 40, 45, something like that. I don't know. I can't be sure of the date.
What happened to you at the end of the war?
When the end of the war came, I'd gone back to my old base at Campbelltown, and we knew that the flotilla was going to move back to its original base down in Portland, HMS Osprey, down to Portland. Now then, as I say, we were remote, we went very unsophisticated, we were little ships. Anyway, we all got painted up and so forth, ready to go down to Portsmouth, down to Portland, where the home fleet was. And it was a rough passage down through the Irish Sea, and by the time we got down to Portsmouth, all that paint, but there was grey rust everywhere, shame. And as this little flotilla of ships came out, I think it was the Foxhound, the oldest or Foxhound was out, escorted us down there, and we came into Portland Harbour, and we anchored. We hadn't been there 5 minutes, but flash from the Nelson, from the flagship of the Nelson. How dare you cross the bows of the Nelson? Well, we didn't know. I mean, we little wartime, we didn't know you weren't allowed to cross the bows of the Nelson. And what are those Irish pens hanging? And somebody had left a line with some clothing on it, hanging from one of the puddle stays to the flag's deck. And I thought, you know, peacetime navy no good at all. You know, I mean, wartime navy and peace. You couldn't operate peacetime conditions under wartime. You wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
But from then onwards, I was then sent down to Devonport, and from Devonport, I got my release. But an interesting point, though, that you know we were all given numbers. Obviously, each man had his own registration number. Mine was PJX 32395. I shall never forget it as long as I take down to my grave, because if you forgot your number, you never got any pay.
Right.
So, and it doesn't matter how long ago it was, you never forget that number. Mine was PJX. If you were Devonport, you would have been DJX. If you'd been Chatham, you would have been CJX. But Portsmouth was my base. But you never got your service number, and that was it. I then became a civilian, and that was it. And you know, it's I can't say that wartime is enjoyable, but an experience I wouldn't have missed in any circumstance or whatever. I was one of the lucky ones because I wasn't sunk.
Yeah.
But you know, apart from that, no, it was.
Okay. So, Ian, before we finish, I've really enjoyed this. Before we finish, you must tell me the story about how you met your wife in 1962, please.
I'm not sure whether it was Saint-Nazaire or Gare du Nord in France. I was with a friend of mine, male friend of mine, and it was very, very crowded in there. And as we were sitting down at this table, two birds appeared on the scene and said they could share our table. The two of these ladies, they were quite attractive looking ladies, and we got chatting, and then we all discovered that in fact we were going to San Sebastian, which meant catching a taxi down to whatever station left for San Sebastian, and we got these two girls, and it was a night train down to San Sebastian, and being a gentleman at the time, we said, well, now we'll find your sleepers first. Let's get your tickets. Find your sleepers first, and then we'll get ourselves settled ourselves. We found the sleepers, and they were empty at the time. So we got the girls into the best seats and said, well, that's it. And then we looked at our tickets, and we happened to be in the same carriage.
Mm.
So, so obviously the contact was made. And I remember this girl I fancied particularly, standing in this corridor, rattling through the centre of France, weighing each other up and so forth, and chatting. And I let her borrow a book on bullfighting, which I knew she'd have to keep, because obviously when we got to the other side, we were in different hotels, but the contact had been made, and therefore, you know, and the contact was made. And I do remember that you weigh each other up, you know, and you sort of, you know, you try and find what you can about each other. And I remember this girl said to me, she said, "Where do you come from?" And I said, "I come from Birmingham." And I saw her face fall. You know, she'd never been to Birmingham. She had pictures of gasometers, cobble streets, and chimneys and so forth, because of course Birmingham was an old industrial city and heavy industry and so forth. But she still married me, and we had. In the end, she sort of said to me, she said, "No, I've spent the 30th happiest years of my life in Birmingham," and that's great, because having being educated in Cheltenham anyway, and having brought up in the Cotswolds, it was a bit of a compliment, in actual fact. And of course, when we came back, she was a nurse in Southampton, and I used to drive down to Southampton to see her and so forth, and it developed from there, of course.
My question is, what was her name?
Mary Rose Walker. Stuart was the name before.
Okay. Ian, I've really enjoyed talking to you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your experiences with us.
Well, yes, I've enjoyed the experience too, but I mean, I've probably been talking an awful lot of rubbish, but you know, the thing is that if it's got some entertainment value in it and some historical value in it, well, I'm very pleased.
Thank you.
Thank you.